For a very long time, society has managed to convince women that they are more emotional than men and that men are logical thinkers and natural born leaders, why women were created to follow. I really wonder how they managed to convince us. But if we're being honest, society never actually defined emotions before assigning them to women. What it did instead was take certain expressions of emotion like crying, talking about pain, complaining about something you don't like, expressing discomfort, and then labeled those as emotions, then quietly coded them as female traits. And at the same time, society also separated violence from that same emotional conversation. For some reason, anger that explodes into violence was no longer seen as an emotional reaction or a failure of emotional regulation. Instead, it became logic, it became a masculine trait, it became a leadership trait. For some reason, crying is emotional and feminine, but violence is logical and a masculine trait simply because men do it more often. That alone should tell you that this conversation has never been honest. Emotion is an internal psychological response to experience. And psychologists have managed to classify emotions into primary emotions and secondary emotions. For primary emotions, emotions like fear, anger, sadness, joy are all forms of primary emotion, and secondary emotions are interpretations that follow primary emotions like shame, resentment, guilt, or pride. Every human being expresses emotion. The difference is not who feels more, but how those emotions are regulated and controlled. Emotional maturity is not the absence of emotion, it is the ability to manage your emotions without causing any harm. And violence does not exist outside of emotion. As a matter of fact, violence is a response to fear, anger, entitlement, humiliation, or loss of control. Crying is also a response to emotion. Talking about your pain is a form of response to emotion. Walking away is a response to emotion. The difference is regulation. One form of regulation de-escalates and the other destroys. But because society wants men positioned as leaders by default, male violence is now excluded from the emotional conversation and rebranded as logic, strength, or assertiveness. If women were the ones committing violence at the scale men do, we already know exactly what the conclusion would have been. Men would have been labeled biologically unstable, emotionally unfit, and incapable of leadership. It's already happening. What am I even saying? This debate wouldn't have even existed in the first place. According to the United Nations, there are about 193 recognized countries globally. As of 2025, only about 25 to 29 of these countries are led by women at the highest executive level, which means that the vast of majority of political power in the world is still led and held by men. And over 100 countries have never had a female leader at all. According to my research, at least 81% of homicide victims are men. Men commit most of the crimes too. And almost 90% of homicide suspects are men. Who's really dangerous here and lacks emotional regulation? Now, when it comes to femicide, women are more likely to be unalived by a family member, a trusted family member partner, than by a stranger. And when it comes to men being unalived, men are more likely to be unalived by a total stranger and who is also more likely to be a fellow man. Then when you go to the prison, men make up at least 93% of inmates, while women make up at least 7%, not up to 10%. And for some reason, we are the ones who lack emotional regulation. According to my research again, the Global Peace Index ranks about 100 countries based on safety and absence of conflict and militarization. And out of those, there are about 10 countries that have been ranked the most peaceful countries in the world, which includes Ireland, New Zealand, and the rest of the other countries. And guess what? About 4 or 5 of these countries are led by women. When we look at the least peaceful countries in the world, places that have been marked by ongoing war, extreme violence, and instability, they are all led by men. Not one is led by a woman. None of the countries ranked among the least peaceful country globally or currently are currently led by women. Not one. So what does that tell you? It tells you that peace and leadership are not determined by gender. But it also tells us something else here. When men dominate leadership structures, society still refuses to connect violence, war, and instability to emotional dysregulation, even when it has cost millions of lives. Leadership requires emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize emotions, regulate reactions, empathize with others, and make decisions without being ruled by your ego or impulse. Society says crying is emotional, speaking up is emotional, expressing discomfort is emotional, talking about something that you don't like is emotional. But for some reason, violence is called logical, really, because all of these are responses to emotion. The only difference is how that emotion is handled. And the only difference between both genders is that one de escalates and the other destroys. Emotion is not gender based. Every human being has emotions because emotion is a human trait, not a female one. But even if we pretend for a moment, for a minute, that emotion was gender based, the data already tells us which gender struggles more with regulating it. I know that you would love to argue this, you would love to argue this so badly. I'm not holding you, but make sure you regulate your emotions before you start doing that and do a proper research.